Talking about rolling thunder.
In an era obsessed with status and power, it should come as no surprise that vehicles would become the central representations of these symbols. But as the 1980s progressed, the muscle cars and helicopters of the Dukes of Hazzard, the A-Team and Magnum PI would not be enough. It would take a special breed, a super breed, if you will, of vehicles to maintain the interests of a new generation of viewers. Whilst the John Badham directed movie Blue Thunder had captured a more R-rated audience's attention the prior year, the January 1984 premiere of Airwolf on the ABC network would beat the PG-ified TV version of Blue Thunder to television screens by several months and dominate that show in all areas. This iconic action-packed series soared into the hearts of audiences with its adrenaline-fueled aerial stunts, captivating characters, and cutting-edge technology. From its thundering rotor blades to its sleek black fuselage, this formidable helicopter became an emblem of power, embodying the daring spirit of adventure that defined the show. Created by Donald P. Bellisario, the mastermind behind other notable shows such as Magnum PI and Quantum Leap, Airwolf, with its groundbreaking blend of high-octane aerial sequences and gripping storytelling, pushed the boundaries of what network television was capable of delivering, setting a new standard for action-packed entertainment. The heart of Airwolf lies in its charismatic characters. Leading the charge is Stringfellow Hawk, a brooding loner portrayed by Jan Michael Vincent. A skilled pilot with a mysterious past, Hawk's connection to the supersonic helicopter Airwolf forms the backbone of the show. Alongside him is Dominic Santini, the wise and affable co-pilot portrayed by Ernest Borgnine, who brings a touch of warmth to the often intense missions. At its core, Airwolf is a celebration of technology and the thrill of exploration. The titular helicopter, armed to the teeth with advanced weaponry and gadgets, became a character in its own right. With the ability to navigate stealthily through the skies, Airwolf embarks on daring missions, espionage operations and combat engagements. Beyond its exhilarating sequences and technological marvels, Airwolf touched upon deeper themes. It explored the human cost of war, delved into the complexities of redemption, and highlighted the power of camaraderie and loyalty. Each episode presented a captivating blend of pulse-pounding adventure and thought-provoking narratives, capturing the attention of audiences week after week. Join me, Mike James, on the latest episode of Rolling Thunder, the 1980s action TV video podcast, as we revisit Airwolf through the prism of its pilot episode, Shadow of the Hawk.
I'm talking about rolling thunder.
With the success of Clint Eastwood's Firefox and John Badham's Blue Thunder, which preceded Airwolf by 2 and 3 years, Airwolf appeared out of the ether seemingly fully formed and ready to capture the attention of audiences. Throw in the recent success of the super vehicle car fetishizing show Knight Rider, created by Glenn Larson, producer, creator, writer and director Donald Bellisario was perfectly placed to throw all of these ingredients together with a garnishing of Ian Fleming and Alistair MacLean style international espionage, and you had a recipe for what would become the pilot episode and much of the early run of Airwolf. Having apprenticed with the mighty Stephen J. Cannell, Bellisario himself was no slouch with work on Battlestar Galactica, Quincy and a plethora of other shows with Cannell and Larson. Here is Bellisario telling me about his early break in the business with Cannell.
I was just getting into television at the time. I had been in advertising for my career. I had graduated with a degree in advertising, and so that's what I followed, but I really wanted to do a longer form. So I wanted to do an hour television or half hour, whatever I could get into. And I approached Steve Cannell, and Steve was a great help. Steve was he was a wonderful mentor to whoever worked with him. He just showed you the ropes from the very beginning, and I admired him and wish I could be like him.
And of course, Steve Cannell is very well known to audiences from the image of him pulling the paper from the typewriter at the end of all of his shows. And you yourself had a very iconic logo as well. I always remember the Bellisaurus image was one that's very ingrained in the subconscious of viewers of a certain age.
But it'd be as a showrunner and jack of all trades that Bellisario would really make his name. He came into his own when he essentially created Magnum PI. Whilst it was broadly based on a concept by Larson, it was Donald that shepherded the show and essentially was showrunner, as he would tell me here.
Well, Glenn had a deal with Universal to put Tom Selleck in an hour episode of something. and that was Glenn's contribution to it. He had Selleck, and Selleck had, to be honest with you, Selleck said he'd pound roofing nails before he'd do a Glenn Larson show. So they said, well, what would you do? And he said, well, there's this guy that you have in the studio named Bellisario, and he's doing some pretty good stuff. I'd work with him. So that's how it came about. And actually, Tom approached me to work with him. And we had lunch together, and I said, Tom, what would you like to do? And he says, I don't want to play myself. I said, that's good. I can do that. So I went and wrote Magnum.
Magnum PI would introduce Bellisario's predilections with the Vietnam War and vehicles.
Vehicles, cars, planes, helicopters. I know that many of these are interests of yours, but it seems to me like shows of this era really did fetishize the cars, the vehicles. What do you think it was about that era? I mean, I know that still exists, obviously, but there's something very specific about that late 70s through to the mid to late 80s where there seems to be this huge cultural fascination with the vehicles and the cars that these characters have. Have you got any thoughts on that? Because you were very central to that, I think, in many ways.
I really don't. I had a love for cars, helicopters, planes, anything that moved and flew. I would put them in my shows, and I knew them because I was a pilot, and so I knew the ins and outs of it.
Magnum and his friends were veterans and bonded deeply over the horrors of that war, and the series would feature frequent flashbacks to the conflict itself. Bellisario was in the service and even encountered Lee Harvey Oswald during his time, an encounter that would ultimately inform his legendary Quantum Leap episode on the same subject. Magnum would also feature aerial photography and exotic vehicles, both of which were interests of Bellisario's, as would 1982's Tales of the Gold Monkey, which he also created and ran. Airwolf would be conceived whilst Bellisario was at the peak of his powers, and the pilot episode's production, which he directed himself, would be produced to almost feature levels. As was often practice at the time, the pilot was shot as a feature-length TV movie, paced to be easily edited into 2 50-minute episodes, but with the option of recouping production costs should the show not go to series by releasing the pilot as a TV movie, or even potentially, as had happened with Battlestar Galactica several years prior, that Bellisario himself had worked on with Larson, a theatrical movie.
I've always felt that the pilot episode of Airwolf is a great film. I think it works very well as a movie from the production, but I also know that there was a movie cut of the pilot of Airwolf that was released internationally with some, stronger language and a little bit more violence, so it could play to an older audience at the cinemas. How did that come about? Was that just part of a contract for an overseas deal? And I've always wondered where that came from.
It was a way to take the 2 hours that was used to create the pilot and just turn it into a movie. In fact, what I tried to do was make movies. I didn't try to make pilots per se. I'd make a movie and work it from there. And that one was well liked by everybody. And the idea was, let's take it out and see if we can release it as a movie. And we did.
And it's interesting how if you go back and I think Airwolf sometimes unfairly gets bundled in with the super vehicle shows, the Knight Riders and the Blue Thunders. But I think it's fair to say that there was a quality to Airwolf, to the production quality of it, that really sets it apart from those. I mean, the pilot looked like it was a huge production. Is that fair to say?
It was a large production, the pilot of it. Did a lot of flying in that. I personally got to do a lot of flying, which kept me quite happy making the pilot. I don't know that the studio liked it that much, but I sure had fun. The key is having fun when you make these things. If you're not having fun making them, they're not going to work.
Now, at this point, it's worth pointing out that whilst it gets thrown in with all of the other 80s action vehicle shows, Airwolf has an edge that those other shows simply didn't. This becomes particularly apparent when one looks at how this hedge betting with the pilot played out. Whilst having the same restrictions around language, violence and sexuality that all of its peers had, Airwolf's pilot and early episodes also had one foot in the murkier world of the spy drama. International espionage with all of the clandestine backstabbing and governmental anonymity and conspiracy was part of the fabric of the show as well. Whilst Airwolf would pivot to the, at the time, more traditional format of our heroes helping out innocent farmers against greedy land baron type storytelling later in its run, these formative episodes were concerned with much more dire global acts of terrorism that felt more sophisticated and adult than the Dukes of Hazzard's whooping and hollering and the Lone Ranger on wheels of Michael Knight and his Trans Am. In fact, Airwolf's pilot was so well produced with its incredible aerial photography, dark villain, doomed romance, and earnest, introspective and tragic hero that when CBS looked at the secondary market, they realised that with a few small edits to remove the weekly show setup of the epilogue and the addition of some ADR R-rated language, the pilot quite convincingly played as an R-rated thriller more akin to Eastwood's Firefox or one of the decade's Frederick Forsyth adaptations. Contrast these moments between the aired TV pilot and the video rental 18 certificate home video version released in Europe.
Archangel's worried I won't take the assignment. You're here to sweeten the deal. Archangel's worried I won't take the assignment. You're here to fuck me.
I've been up there doing it for the cameras, and I'm gonna do it for Mona. Either that or you can use your choppers to haul tourists around Disneyland.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah! I've been up there doing it for the cameras, and I'm gonna do it for Mona. Either that or you can take your choppers and stick them up your fucking ass.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah!
This version would only make it to theatres in Indonesia, but it's testimony to the production value of the pilot that it would get this treatment. We open with a very memorable sci-fi inspired sequence of the crew led by David Hemmings Moffat, pilot and creator of The Lady as she would become to be known by characters and fans, approaching and firing the chopper up and taking her on an exciting demonstration of her capabilities before, quite violently, in both versions, wiping out the command room. Archangel, deputy director of the fictionalized version of the CIA, The Firm, redubbed to actually be the CIA in the European version for some reason, survives to solicit reclusively brooding test pilot Stringfellow Hawk, played with squinting intensity by Jan Michael Vincent, to help him recover the purloined weapon of mass destruction. It's worth circling back to the violence in this intro. Airwolf was considered to be a peer of shows like The A-Team, but here the bullets do find their victims. It was not unusual for people to be casually machine gunned down in Airwolf, and whilst it was largely bloodless, it was there. This would happen less as the edges were filed off the show as it progressed, and the less said about the Canadian-produced stock footage-ridden and recast fourth season, but in the first season, and certainly the pilot, it's actually quite surprising. Also surprising is the pace and general tone. Hawk is a tragic character who is sheltering himself from the world in the belief that anyone he loves will die. Aside from visits from uncle figure Dom, played by Ernest Borgnine, his only companion is his dog Tet, his priceless art collection, and the hawk he serenades with his vintage cello. There's a resigned sadness to the way that Vincent plays the character that would be unfortunately echoed by the real-life demons that tragically plagued the actor and cut his promising career and ultimately his life short. Hawk's romance with firm operative Gabrielle is also surprisingly intense for a show of this genre, as is the upsetting, torturous treatment that she receives at the hands of the evil and perverted Moffat, that even in the TV version go to places that are surprising for the day. Hawk's single-minded vengeance on Moffat continued this dark trend that is in stark contrast to the buddying around of the Cannell and Larson shows. Having said that, the action-adventure elements with all of their associated trappings do not disappoint. The Bell 222 helicopter is just the right side of believable in its look, whereas Blue Thunder felt like it could be a dropship in a dystopian science fiction. The Lady looked functional, and whilst her capabilities were on the fantastical side, she looked legitimate. The shooting helicopter was eventually sold after the show ended and became an ambulance helicopter in Germany, where it crashed in a thunderstorm and was destroyed in 1982, killing all 3 crew members aboard. The pilot features lots of amazing aerial photography, much of which would get repurposed in later seasons of the show. In fact, the much derided 4th season of Airwolf apparently didn't shoot one single second of aerial film, simply reusing stock footage collected during production of the preceding 3 seasons. The pilot's climax battle of armed forces throwing everything they have at Airwolf as Hawk and Santini pursue the murderous psycho played with sweaty, obsessed and slightly pervy glee by 60s icon Hemmings, who would go on to direct numerous episodes of The A-Team, is sensational, with escalating peril, action and music. Sylvester LeVay's memorable score mixes the electronic with the orchestral and would be used for the climax battle in every episode that follows it. In fact, the structure of the climax of the show's ensuing episodes was reassuringly familiar. A villain would attempt to escape, the building intro of LeVay's theme would kick in as the rotors fired, and the theme would crescendo as the inevitable final victorious explosion sounded out. Even later seasons where the peril had diminished from international terrorism to farmer-bothering land barons maintained this comforting tradition. Oh, and you want minutiae? Here's some minutiae. I mentioned on the last episode of Rolling Thunder in regards to the A-Team, the practice of using clips from that week's episode over the end credits, pausing the image when it was time to throw on some credits. The benefits of this is that the editors could run the clips longer before pausing to display the credits if an episode ran short, or just use shorter clips or paused images if the episode ran long. Airwolf shares this practice, which again means we get the opportunity to discover different lengths, arrangements and variants of LeVay's score. I loved Airwolf back in '84. I was fascinated with how dark it felt, how complex, brooding and adult it seemed to my young mind. I remember being amazed to find out about the alternative version and renting it on video and being shocked by the added language and changes. The idea that there could be different variants and edits of something was completely new and foreign to me. This was the early days of home video and the sell-through market was still virtually non-existent, with most films being rental only and therefore prohibitively expensive unless bought ex-rental. I used to pick up Video Collector magazine from my local newsagents when I was just 10 or 11 years old. It was essentially a trade magazine for Ma and Pa video stores, but had articles about new releases and lists of titles with their prices. When I saw that the European version of Airwolf was available, I nagged my parents to buy it for me. I clearly remember obsessively checking our post for what seemed like years waiting for it to arrive, and then being fascinated by the box and the very idea that I owned a pre-recorded film and that it was Airwolf and that it had that icon of transgression, the red 18 certificate circle logo on it. Aside from the memorable opening credits and the vague memory of it being that show that was on before Bullseye on ITV, in the UK at least, Airwolf is usually lumped in with the Street Hawks and Blue Thunders of this world, but I urge you to go back and watch this pilot again within this context and allow yourself to be pleasantly surprised. Airwolf holds a special place in the hearts of its dedicated fan base. The fandom has kept the spirit of the show alive, fostering a vibrant community that cherishes the memorable moments, quotes and unforgettable characters and vehicles. Through fan events and online discussions and collectors groups, fans have continued to celebrate and honour the show's enduring impact, passing on their love of Airwolf to new generations. Join me next time on Rolling Thunder as I take a look at the pilot episode of a lesser known, in the UK at least, entry in the 80s action TV canon with the pilot episode of Stephen J. Cannell's Riptide, which also premiered in January of 1984. Feedback is always welcome via rollingthundervideoshow@gmail.com or below in the comments. I'm always open to suggestions on topics to cover, and please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.
I'm talking about Rolling Thunder.